Welcome to BRR Media. Today I'm joined by Adrian Wildfire, the Director of Scientific and Business Strategy. Adrian, it's great to have you with us.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Now, Adrian, hVIVO has recently launched a new malaria human challenge model, and the first volunteers have been inoculated, which is really exciting. Can you first talk to us a bit more about malaria and tell us if it's still a problem?
Okay, sure. I mean, we're bringing this model on because we have seen the situation worsening slightly, and I think malaria, as we know, infects millions of people, kills hundreds of thousands of mainly children under 3, especially under 1 every year. Some of the drugs are starting to fail, the artemisinin combination therapies. We've seen resistance coming out of Cambodia, and that gene has recently been found in Africa, where 95% of infections take place. Now, if it takes hold there, and we see a lot of transference of that resistance gene, then we're going to need some new therapies and need some new drugs. And one of the reasons we're bringing the new model in to hVIVO, which has got a really seminal history of doing these works, and we started out with influenza and moved into other upper respiratory tract infections, and developed the expertise in human challenge. I think widening our model and bringing that in is really going to help advance some new drugs into the malaria field, which are desperately needed, and also create some new backbone therapies to take us into the 21st century.
And Adrian, how has COVID-19 affected all of this?
Well, as you can probably expect, not well. The supply lines, as we've seen from everything from toilet rolls to bread rolls, has been impacted, and I'm afraid that malaria has been almost no different to these operational and service supply lines, in much as a lot of people have been off ill. A lot of lockdowns have occurred, face-to-face consultations with ill patients have been disrupted, and we've seen a retrograde step for malarial treatment. And I think we have to run fast to catch up now, to make up those numbers who've been missed, who should have been treated, still need treating, and to try and make up some time towards the WHO objective, which was eradication of malaria.
I think many people would be asking, Adrian, do we need more drugs here? And is there any resistance being shown?
Well, another good question. I think we'll always need more drugs because we do see resistance appearing. As I said, artemisinin is now being affected. We've lost most of the quinine derivatives. So yes, new drugs are desperately needed. I know, working with other companies, that they're very concerned about this, and new pipeline drugs are in both discovery and in early phase. And we hope that we can test those in this model to see which are the most suitable to bring forward to replace the failing regimens.
It'd be great if you could talk to us a little bit about the current vaccine release and its effect here.
Okay, the RTSS, a great drug, great vaccine rather, from GSK, put a lot of work into that, and I think it is a step forward with 30% efficacy to protecting some of those children. I mean, you're protecting 30% of that neonatal and pediatric population, which is incredibly important. I mean, these are children that would die. So you can't say, okay, it hasn't reached a threshold of, say, 50% or whatever. It's achieving something, and I think we need to recognize that. However, some of the other one, like the Oxford R21, is looking very promising with 70%. But these will take a time to roll out. They will probably need boosting. We know that immunity to malaria wanes very quickly within 2 or 3 years. So this won't be a solution for all. It'll erode those bastions of disease which have been set up mainly in the Africas, but it won't cure it overnight. And meanwhile, we need to protect people who are either traveling to those areas or living in those endemic areas, and try and protect them from disease, because the effects of disease, as we've seen from returning travelers, can be very severe.
So how do you see the next, say, 3 to 5 years in malaria drug and vaccine development?
I think it's going to be an exciting time, because for the first time we have seen some vaccine efficacy, which is actually worth talking about. We've tried circumsporozoite proteins, we've tried whole fractionated sporozoite. All these things give you a certain amount of protection, but often at the expense of these side effects, these adverse events. I think as we're seeing potentially fewer of those, and we're moving into new models, like people are now trialing mRNA vaccines on the back of COVID success, I think we've got some real opportunities to expand into this neglected area and try and push forward to protect more of the vulnerable populations. And I think as we've seen some very effective drugs coming along, and moving away from some of the sort of knee-jerk drugs like trying antibiotics, trying some novel compounds. I think maybe we'll have some real new drugs on the market attacking some novel novel targets for these parasites that could make a real difference.
So Adrian, what role do you see hVIVO in actually furthering the field for new drugs and vaccines for malaria?
Well, I think having what we call a controlled human malaria infection model, CHMI, but you can just call it a malaria human challenge. I think that's very important. And we've seen how important it is to bringing drugs through from the phase 1 safety into actual efficacy trials, what we call the phase 2 efficacy trials. Do they work? If you can model that in the unit, within a clinic, and get results that translate to the field, it means you can do that in a safe environment, a controlled environment, an environment where you get 100% infectivity, which you don't see in the wild. You sort of hope, especially with the prophylactic, you hope that there's enough malaria out there that during the course of the study, enough people will be infected to show whether it worked or not in the placebo to compare to your active arm, say your prophylactic. If you don't see enough infections, the numbers may be too low to be able to work that out. We shouldn't forget that although tens of thousands of people were inoculated with COVID vaccines, it was down to less than 100 in each of these studies where we actually got the data to actually give us the efficacy. So sometimes you need to have very, very large studies. If you do it within a clinic where you have 100% infection rate, you can use far lower numbers and still have very good translatable data.
So tell us a bit more about your models and what they actually look like.
Okay, we have what's called a DVI, direct venous inoculation model, using these GMP or these good manufacturing practice sporozoites, which is the infective stage that comes out of the mosquito into the human bloodstream. We can take those that have been grown in a sort of laboratory environment, and we can inject those up to a certain number. 3,200 is how many we use. Sounds a lot, but actually if people with severe malaria have 5 million per microliter, that's not a lot. You infect them, they go to the liver, and then they develop into the blood stage. So we can model very closely what actually happens in the environment by taking exactly the same stage that infects, inoculating in a very similar way to mosquitoes. You're putting it straight into the human body, through the skin, and then see it go through all those stages. So you can model very closely what happens in the environment, but with a parasite you can treat with afterwards. So I think this model is very robust, it's very safe, it's very predictable, and allows us to go to drug manufacturers and vaccine manufacturers and say, would you like to test those for efficacy in our model? And if it has good efficacy, it's very likely that will also show in the field and translate well into the field efficacy studies to give the body of evidence you need for these things to be marketed.
So what should someone do if they want to take part?
Well, we have a website, we have phone numbers, we have people waiting to come along and do these studies. My own son was on an influenza study that I ran with an influenza virus that I grew up with another company. We have our own models here. If you want to be on one of the studies like the malaria, influenza, RSV, then please come along. We're looking for healthy volunteers to come onto these studies, to test these new drugs and vaccines. And these new drugs and vaccines will be the drugs of the future. Without volunteers, we can't carry on. The industry will dry up. So really, it's down to not only the goodwill, but also the altruism of some of these volunteers that allows the whole industry to move forward. So we're saying to you, please come along to our clinics. You do get paid for your efforts, you get looked after, you get food, and you'll get some rest. And we've got some good, safe models that you can help us with.
Well, Adrian, thank you very much for speaking to us today. It's been great to hear about the model and what's going on with hVIVO.
Thank you very much, Rosie. Thank you.